Yeah, so just in terms of religion, there's a lot of the things that you and St. John have spoken about in the past. Obviously, it's a way of uniting people around a common cause. It's a way of getting people to move in the same direction. Um, but then there's the other aspect of it, which I think that St. John's touched upon quite a lot, and I've been thinking about a lot recently, which
Mm-hmm.
is how do you rationalize suffering?
Mm.
Because and I think you and St. John actually spoke about this weirdly in that video about Job, which I
Yeah,
found really
that's right.
interesting.
Yeah.
And just what you were talking about with the argument that is often used is I don't believe in God because how could a God be so evil, etc. It's one that I've encountered, but I notice more and more that as things kind of get worse financially, economically for people of our generation, because I would term myself half millennial, half Gen Z,
Mm-hmm.
is I see constantly more and more people at least exploring some sort of religious faith. Ironically, Catholicism is increasingly attractive to people our age. And so that whole thing that's been getting me thinking is how do I rationalize the fact that things are a lot worse? And I think you spoke about a
Mm.
lot of this with St. John as well, but that's just kind of what's been going over in my head. Because how do I rationalize the fact that I may not succeed?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because there are no promises, because I'm in the middle of learning German like crazy, but there's no guarantee of a job at the end. In fact, there's a high likelihood I won't get one. And that means I'm going to live at a level far lower than one that I would like if I can't get a job. And so how do you deal with that uncertainty? How do you make it so you don't feel like a total and abject failure? Do you say it's God's will? Do you accept the way the world is and accept the world for what it is? And then how do you make that something not official but solid, so there's something behind it, so you feel as if what you're going through doesn't not have a purpose. That's a bit jumbled, but that's pretty much what's been in my head.
I mean, that's a really pertinent question, Isaac. It's yeah. I mean, I won't lie. It's gone through. It's been in my head recently as well. These we're coming up on difficult times. If anything, they're already here. And it's not guaranteed that even if we're aware of that fact and we react accordingly, we will succeed.
No.
What do we do about that? How can I cope with that idea? I don't think it's as simple as you act properly and hope, because the reality seems to me to be, I think Machiavelli got it right, in that it's about half and half virtu and the other half fortuna. So fortune and virtue, what you choose to do and what providence brings. I think Machiavelli was right in giving fortuna an edge over virtu. So even if you act properly and you do everything right, if circumstance doesn't go your way, there's nothing you can do. But we still have to, I think, but your question still stands. God is still there in the corner asking the question, what are you going to do about that? How are we going to cope with that reality?
I think there are two things you can do. One is not ignore the fact that things can get worse. But I also spoke with Francis fairly recently, and he made a very good comment, which is that our lives are stories that we tell ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so the simple physical act of saying to yourself, "it will be all right," is a weird sort of double think. Because by saying that, it doesn't mean that it is all right and that you are at that moment potentially going through a pretty bad situation. But the very act of saying it will be all right is what will, over time, make it all right, in whichever way or not. That was his point. And I thought that was actually a really fair assessment.
I think that's a very fair point. I think you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, we're narratives. We're circumferences of narratives.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, but I think we are wrong. I think I can say this very honestly. I think we're wrong if we think of this purely individually. I think the way we can justify ourselves and justify our lives is through our relationship with other people.
Yes.
And I think that's at its peak when it's a community, when it's a family, when it's, again, circles of people.
Mm-hmm.
So I was, what's influencing my thinking is we're in Holy Week right now, and I'm in the south of Spain because I'm visiting my parents. And the south of Spain has a very beautiful Holy Week. And so every day there's a different procession, and they bring out a different float carried by men on their shoulders with different scenes of the Passion or of just icons of Christ or the Virgin Mary. I went to one yesterday. And it's very intense. It's very intense because they start at 8 and they go for 4 hours. They walk around the village for 4 hours with a float on their back. I think they switch halfway through, but not the whole town is there, but a significant portion of the town is there. And you can see a mosaic of the different people that are involved. Some of them are wealthier, some of them are poorer, some of them are smarter, some of them are less so. Some of them are children, some of them are retired. And this is in a town that the south of Spain is quite poor, and you can see it. Even the people that have money, it's a level of subsistence that other places in Europe would scoff at. They would consider quite scarce. So I was thinking about that. I was thinking about this, okay, because the impression you get seeing this procession and seeing all these rituals is that this is a living place. This is a living community, a living society. Look at how they're organizing. Look at all the men, look at all the kids, and look at the candles, and look at everyone is involved, and no one's scoffing at it, and no one's thinking this is strange. And yet there's these levels of poverty and these levels of precariousness that people just live with. And I think, I mean, that isn't really, so what's coming to mind from all of that is that is how a society works with poverty, is that it just is there, and you find other ways to cope with it. You actually don't solve the problem of poverty. If it's inevitable, so my thinking is, if Fortuna has decided that we live in a time where most of us aren't going to make it, whatever that means, then there's two ways to go about it. And I'll come back to your point, which is we can reframe what we consider success to be. We can tell ourselves a different story. Hey, everything's going to be all right. Hey, I'm not going to worry about this. This is a very common attitude in the south of Spain. Don't worry about it. It's fine. At the end of the day, we're going to leave life dead. This is something that someone actually told me. No one leaves life alive, so why worry? Which is, I mean, it's you'd think that's very existential and nihilistic. People here are not nihilistic.
No. Huh. Do you think perhaps that a community like that in the south of Spain that's poor and is almost used to being poor? Well, do you think a better way of asking this question is, do you think the reason that so many of us of our age, particularly in Northern Europe, in America, in Western Europe, are finding it so difficult to adapt is because that community is not there, and we are actually just a bunch of individuals. Because the thing I have noticed since moving to Germany is that the network idea, the family network and the friends network and the sports and social clubs network, those are all very, very important here. Germans depend on their network and they don't really like anything outside of it. And that has its strengths and weaknesses, but one of its strengths is that people feel very much that they're part of community here. And they all
Okay.
depend on each other and they all fight for each other. They all put each other, someone will do you a favor, then you do them a favor, etc., etc. So I wonder if the main reason that so many people our age in the UK, the US, perhaps Australia, the Anglosphere are finding it so difficult is because all those networks are not there so much. And that's why
I think you're probably
more
right.
mental health crises.
I think you're probably right. I think to be quite broad about it, I think the Anglosphere and the Protestant Anglosphere specifically did something pretty remarkable with the last 300 years, with capitalism and modernity. And I mean, look where we are today. We have a level of material wealth that is ludicrous. It's incredible.
Mm-hmm.
And this was brought about by essentially by the Protestant Anglosphere. And I can't kid myself with that. We talk about Catholicism, and I'm a big admirer of Catholicism. I'm trying to convert to it, but I can't deny that it's a feudal religion. Or at least it seems to me a religion apt for a feudal ecosystem. It so happens, I think, that is the ecosystem we're going into. So I think it's even more appropriate. But I can't say that it's as powerful as Anglo-Protestantism was. And the reason, it seems to me, a very simplified reason, at least a part of the reason, has to be what you're describing, which is people were empowered to act as individuals. They were allowed to experiment and be flexible, or if maybe being allowed to is the wrong way to put it, because from my understanding, Britain was not lenient. It hammered people into the sort of people that, if they were inventive and creative and different, they did it in spite of the society. But that ecosystem of forging people in such a way that they would then do things in spite of created the greatest minds of the last half a millennia.
Yeah.
So that's obsolete now, it seems to me. And the remnants of it are, in a sense, us, which are people that are sort of just floating. We're being carried by tides. And it's very painful. I think you're absolutely right that part of it is being unanchored from community.
Mm-hmm.
And that used to be an advantage, but it no longer seems to be.
No, not at all. Though I would argue that the network aspect of it is not evident in the Anglosphere. But I've had a very different experience since coming to Germany, because I have locked myself into Jessie's family network and the people that she knows. And that has definitely given me an in. So I used to think that the whole world was going one particular way. And then I realized fairly recently that really no, a lot of what I have noticed that's going wrong is particularly evident within the Anglosphere, but not. I mean, things are not so good here as they once were 10 years ago. But the German government is very pragmatic, and they're not pretending that they're going to pay the pensions. I mean, I can go into that, but they've pretty much kind of explicitly said that they won't pay. The pensions will be paid, but they won't be worth anything, and they're not lying about that. They've just kind of said it. Yeah. Whereas the British government is pretending that all the pensions will be paid forever, but everyone kind of knows that's not true. Um, and I kind of see the German economy as where the British economy was maybe 5 to 10 years ago, but the Germans are aware of it and they're kind of like, oh boy, we actually need to make some changes here. So I'm actually quite optimistic about being in Germany, whereas if I was still in the UK, I think I would think very differently.
I wonder then if all the bad press about other countries in the world, including Germany, from British media or Anglo media from American sources as well, is, if not projection, then just trying to manifest that everywhere else is also doing badly. So there's nothing wrong with us particularly.
Well, the way I would frame it is that what the British and Anglo media does is they take a story or they take a thing such as, okay, the decline of the car industry in Germany, and then they lay on top of that high levels of exaggeration and high levels of projection, and then the story is released. Um, so so there are kernels of truth in some of the stories uh, in the news, but a lot of them are taken out of context, and a lot of them are not really the truth. The truth. A lot of them are layered on with projection from the Americans or from the Brits on top of his exaggeration as well. So it's not to say they're not true. That's kind of a long-winded way of saying that. Because it would be wrong to say the German economy is not going through a hard time. I think everyone knows that. But the people dealing with that in charge are not stupid. They're aware of that in the way that I don't think people were 10 years ago in the UK.
Okay, that's very good. I'm glad to hear it. That's at least hopeful. I have a
Yeah,
friend who lives in Berlin, and she's convinced that she wants to stay living there.
fair enough.
She's very
Yeah,
happy, and I'm very happy for her. I
yeah.
was a bit worried because you get all this bad press about Germany, but I'm glad at the idea that may, at least in part, be untrue or
Well,
exaggerated.
I, I think a lot of people have a lot of different motivations for wanting Germany for German bashing in the news, because I mean everyone's aware that Germany militarily has not been that much of a strong country for the last 80 years, and they're very very concerned about the possibility of the Russians coming further west. And so suddenly, I mean, I remember having conversations 5 years ago with people who said that I was stupid or just, too far right or whatever it was for wanting an increase in military spending and or supporting an increase in military spending, where every budget was just saying no, cut the spending, cut the spending. And now suddenly it's very much in vogue to be pro-military spending. So that's why everyone's keen that Germany rearms, and everyone's keen that Germany does well because they kind of see Germany as the defense against the Russians. Um, and so there's that. There's also projection. There's also people wanting to take away the spotlight from the fact that the British economy is suffering. Um, Britain is in a far worse state than Germany economically, but you wouldn't get that from reading British newspapers.
No, you wouldn't. Okay, very interesting.
Yeah, I know this hasn't quite touched on religion. Actually, we've kind
No,
of
no,
gone.
I think we went to important topics, which was, I mean, we landed on a very pertinent issue, which is community, and that
Yeah.
led us to Germany and how that seems to be, at least where you're living, still intact.
Well, so one thing that's very common in Germany is you don't leave your what's called your Heimat, which means your home city. People just don't really leave their hometowns or their home cities. And if you live in a village, you go to the nearest city as a young person, which is like 25 minutes away or half an hour away or something. To move more than that away is considered very odd. People don't really leave that much. And so a lot of people know each other. There's a lot of very strong social networks, and people bond through football or through I don't know, the Deutsche Alpenverein, which is like the German Alpine Club and stuff like that. And so, and that's all over Germany. That it's very, very common to just stay where you are. And socially speaking, the whole system, the whole country here is set up to allow you legally to help your children, help the people around you. So you can, for example, you can gift a house to your children tax free, which is unheard of in the UK.
Yeah, that kind of puts into frame why other countries might not allow for that. It sort of makes that decision by the UK suspect.
How do you mean, sorry?
It's just, why would you not want that to be the case? Like, why? Of course, like Germany's position seems perfectly reasonable and correct. So why isn't everyone doing it? That's my point.
So the usual answer, and the one I've definitely heard before, is that if you buy a house in 1990 and then you sell it in 2025, you've made a ton of money, and surely you should pay some of that to the government for the good of everyone. That's the usual stock answer. What that doesn't take into account is the more, I'm just going to call it more than 2% inflation a year since 1990. And it doesn't take into account that there are multiple siblings and that prices have skyrocketed. But that's the usual reason that there's also a wish, I think, on the government's part to disincentivize families looking out for each other and trying to be dependent on the government. I think but that's been the way England has been for 500 years. They've always tried to do that. Um, yeah, so for example, England was actually the first place where the guild system became a really, really powerful entity. And so people became more loyal to the guild than even to their own families. That was what was incentivized. Um, and then the clan system in Scotland got wiped out because loyalty to the country and to the king specifically, or the queen, was the most important thing. Um, and so for the last 500 years, what we've had is this effect which incentivizes prioritizing the state or the government over your own family. Because people all went to boarding schools. So you took a load of people, you put them into boarding school, you took them away from their families. Where boarding schools are not very popular in Germany. And many people don't join the military because they don't want to be taken away from their home states. Um, yeah, so it's the English have almost been primed, it would seem, for 500 years to accept the fact that the family is less important than the state or the government. Whereas it's the other way around in Germany.
How
And
do
I think
you?
Spain as well.
I think Spain. Spain in boarding schools are very unpopular here.
Yeah.
Or at least no one. I don't know anyone who's
No.
gone to one, knows someone who's gone to one, or has sent their children to one.
No.
Whereas I do know several English people who've been to boarding schools.
Yeah.
Uh,
Myself included.
yeah,
Yeah.
I didn't know you went to boarding school.
Yeah, I went to boarding school for 2 years in about 2011 to 2013.
How was that?
I really did not like it. And
Yeah.
I would never, ever, ever send my children to a boarding school ever under
Yep.
any circumstances.
Everyone that I've met who's been to one says exactly the same thing.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it.
It's awful. I'm sorry to hear that, man.
I mean, I learned from it. Like, I wouldn't say I wouldn't want the experience. And I think any experience is pretty good as long as you learn from it. But I think it taught me. I think it really did actually teach me the value of your family and having people around you that you could trust. I think that's what it really taught me.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you got something out of it.
Yeah, no, definitely.
So, Well, how do we reason though that because from what I can gather, Germany and Spain both are not particularly anti-welfare state. If anything, they're very pro it. I mean, so is the UK. But
Um,
like Spanish people, that a lot of people's intent or hope is to become a civil servant, a functionary, just get
mm.
paid eternally by the government to do very little.
the the uh, the impression I get, and I kind of would like to know if this is true or not, because this might be wrong. But the impression I get, particularly with the Spanish, is that they will do the minimum. So take healthcare, for example, in terms of their in terms of the socialist welfare state, they will pay the minimum because it means that the country functions a lot more effectively if they just kind of pay the basic healthcare for everybody. But
Yeah.
anything on top of that, you have to pay yourself, uh, because because is that correct?
I mean, yeah, in practice, that's the case. I mean, everyone has healthcare, and it's very good
Yeah,
if you can wait for it.
right.
That's the main issue. So if
So
you
in
want, yeah, if you want something quick and you want something done urgently, you go privately, and it's very
right,
good. Private medicine, yeah, and
yeah,
public medicine is also very good, but it's underpaid and
right.
overstretched.
So in the UK, I think they've gone down the route of everything will be free for everybody, no matter what. Which just, I mean, that seems unfeasible. It seems unfeasible, particularly uh, when you have a generation of people, i.e., the baby boomers and Gen X, who are now hitting their 70s and 80s, particularly the baby boomers, and they steadfastly refuse to have children, like just refused, and then they're surprised that there's not enough young people to lift them out of bed. Now they're in their 80s. I mean, the number of people who haven't made this connection is kind of mind-boggling.
Oh yeah.
And there's also not enough people to pay the taxes to fund the NHS properly.
Yes.
Um, but then the way things work in Germany is a bit different. So this is actually something that I see in the news a lot, which is that Germany gets derided as this socialist state who's just gone left wing and nuts. And the reality is actually quite different because in order to be able to even access any form of healthcare or welfare here in Germany, you essentially need to pay into the pots first. So there is unemployment insurance, but you need to have paid 6 months or 9 months into the pot before you can access that. So I don't claim that, for example.
Hmm.
There's a load of other insurances and enforced subscriptions essentially that you must pay. So there's none of this like you get stuff for free. Not really. And so another misconception that people have about the people who the migration into Germany, the migrants in 2015, 2016, is that the vast majority of them now have jobs and they were forced to get jobs and they were forced to pay their taxes and they were forced to do all of these things before they could benefit from the German state. That's something that people don't actually know. Um, so it's not quite come to Germany and we'll give you everything. It's come to Germany, work, and then we'll give you some stuff. So you have to work first and pay into a lot of stuff before you get to access the pots.
Yes.
So it's not. There's actually a distinction because Sozialist in German would mean socialist,
Mhm.
whereas how they actually term themselves is a sozial state, which doesn't quite mean social.
Would you
I
would you say it means like we the closest might be social democrat?
No, I don't think it has a direct translation into English. I actually wouldn't know how to translate it.
Okay.
But sozial means that there is a specific code of behavior that you as a person must uphold. Um,
in
order to be a good citizen.
Interesting. Yeah, so it's. I mean, one thing that was very impressed on me by one of the countries I actually did have to do a case study on during my degree was Germany. One thing that was impressed upon me was that they consider themselves quote a militant democracy, and what they mean by like active policing of their democracy. That's why they have a constitutional court that can ban ban parties from running elections. And it runs like, it makes sense to me what you're describing, that would be the same country. A country that has that sort of attitude towards their political model would also have that attitude towards benefiting from a social security net.
They also don't really take the sort of thing that the police, for example, take in the UK. So the kind of random violence, yes, you get a few of those. I mean, there is a potential argument to be made that a lot of the stabbings that happened pre the election campaign may or may not have been agents. I can't say one way or the other, but it is possible.
What's the implication? Agents by who?
Well, so the problem with getting into
I'm taking it as a rumor.
Yeah, it's rumor, so it's all hypothetical. And the problem with getting into this is that you can get into hypotheticals quite easily. But let's say, for the sake of argument, that Russia wants to destabilize Europe.
Oh, I see.
What are they going to do? They're trying to. I mean, the AfD has been pretty pro-Putin over the last few years. What are they going to do? They've got agents all over Europe, and we've got agents all over Russia. I mean, let's be honest. Or probably, I mean, I'm not saying that for definite, but that's likely. And so, I mean, it's also likely that in the West has stoked riots such as in Belarus, Romania, Serbia, and so why wouldn't they do the same to us? So all you need to do is essentially find a disenfranchised man who is 25, doesn't have much in the world, and is from a migrant background, and then just say, here, stab somebody. Like, it's not that huge of a leap to make. I'm not saying it happened, but it could have happened. I'm not discounting it. Do you see what I mean?
I do see what you mean. Okay, yeah. But getting back to the point, which is that the police in Germany don't tolerate that sort of violence usually.
Well, they don't tolerate any form of violence. So the Extinction Rebellion people who sat down in the middle of the M25 around London and blocked traffic, that has never happened here. If you are going to make a protest, you have to let the police know. You go to a specific location. You are guided by armed policemen, and then you stop protesting at a specific time. So there's armed policemen everywhere. There's none of this. There's none of the kind of two-tier policing in Germany that you see in other parts of the world.
Okay. How does Germany do? Like, how are the getting back to this idea of community and getting back to this point of religion? What are public manifestations of religion like in Germany?
So it is. I mean, I can only really speak for Bavaria.
Okay.
But it is generally accepted that you are either Lutheran or Catholic. That if you're a member of those churches, you pay church taxes, and the church taxes are put to very good use. So there's a lot of charity work that goes on by both the Lutherans and the Catholics here. Like a lot of charity work, a lot of things that they do. And so public manifestations, there's a lot of religious symbolism, even all over the city. All of the holidays, especially in Bavaria, are religious holidays. Germans in general are far more reserved, so they wouldn't have a huge parade like Semana Santa or Holy Week. They would publicly go to mass. So, for example, the Freiwillige Feuerwehr or the volunteer fire service here is quite a big deal because most of the firemen here are actually volunteers, and every single one of the fire trucks is blessed by a priest, for example. So it's definitely very much part
Wow.
of the fabric of the life. And they go to mass on Sankt Florian's Tag, which is or Dienst, which is Saint Florian's Day. He's the patron saint of firemen, and so religiosity is kind of woven into the fabric of society here in a
That's
way that
very
is not
interesting. Yeah.
way you wouldn't see it in the UK at
Yeah.
all. You know?
Yeah, you'd want that. You'd want something like what you're describing.
Yeah.
Like if I was a volunteer fireman, I'd want to be blessed. I want my fire truck to be blessed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you're fighting fire or you're in a bad accident, you want that thing to be blessed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This is very interesting, Isaac.
Hmm.
It gives me a lot to think about. One thing that me and St. John have been talking about is what would it look like to instigate like rituals or community actions, even just very small, 4 people, the 4 of us, or
Ah,
at whatever level, that would grow or promote this sort of behavior. This sort of, I would want my fire trucks blessed. I would want a place where, if you're a young man, you can go with other young men and feel that you're growing and that you're validated and that you can excel and that you're working towards, the future and be supported religiously.
I
So,
really liked your idea that you
mhm.
put on the telesignoria.
No one answered.
Yeah, I meant to. I've been thinking about it a lot because if you make, I think one way of weaving religiosity into your life is by putting it even just in small things.
Yes, I think you're right.
And so if there is a semi-regular twice a month or even once every 2 months, sorry, hike where you are specifically doing something that is hard, you're hiking and you're hiking, you're doing something that will take a lot of effort. So you put 15 kilos worth of stones in a backpack.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then you go and put those stones somewhere specifically, and there is a
yes.
ceremonial act in which you're doing that, and you even bring along a priest.
Hmm.
You, what, you're doing something with other people that is community building, but it's also got religiosity kind of weaved into it. So I'm just thinking out loud at this
No,
moment,
that's
but
right.
it will even just small things like that. I think will build.
That's exactly what my motivation for proposing that was. To be transparent, because of the recording,
Yeah.
to lay it out very briefly, the idea was that 4 of us or more, we can invite other people, but whoever wants to come along would take a day, hike, drive up somewhere near a mountain, maybe wear very simple clothing. If we wanted to, if we wanted to, I mentioned wearing a habit and sandals because people would recognize what that is then. Like people wouldn't blink an eye if you said, "What are you doing?" And you go, "We're on a pilgrimage," or "We're doing a
Mm,
short pilgrimage for the day." And they'd see you dressed like that, they wouldn't blink. But
mm,
just whatever, just sandals, for example. We could just say we wear sandals, and other clothing, and we carry some heavy stones or a heavy stone in the backpack or in our hands, and then you hike for the day to a place where there's either a cross or a monastery or a shrine or just a place that you've chosen. And
mm,
then at the top of it, you have a simple meal of bread, wine, and dried fruit or something.
mhm.
Place the rock, share a few words, maybe say grace, and eat. And then you hike down. And you do that frequently enough that it becomes a sort of, you know, every quarter you do that ritual, and more people can come along, and maybe you take some photos at the end of it, and it gives you an excuse to do something difficult, to do it with your friends or your family, and it builds. One thing that people do here, for example, is that this was very interesting. My mum told me about me. So in the south of Spain, my mother was telling me about this yesterday. In the south of Spain, the carrying of religious statues during Holy Week used to be done by day laborers. So it used to be the people that would work on the farms and on the fields. They used to get paid by the church to carry these things during Holy Week.
Oh, wow.
So this was employment for them. That's why they do it. They do it because it was a job. But that stopped happening because a lot of people left the fields and the church stopped having as much money.
Yeah.
So that stopped happening about 40, 50 years ago here.
Right.
And so what happened is that fraternities were founded, what they call hermandades here, brotherhoods, of men who their entire purpose for existing is that during Holy Week they carry the statues. And it's sort of it seemed to me to be the equivalent, for a different reason, of the fallas in Valencia, of the Club Falleros.
Yes.
Of people that would meet, I don't know how often, but they have this association. They have a locale where they meet, and they train, and they have special uniforms, and they are organized, and they have captains. And every year they train to carry the statues out of the doors of the church, because the doors are often smaller than the statues, so they have to crouch or crawl. Down steps, round streets, through arches, without damaging the statue. And it's amazing. And it's very difficult work, clearly. But you see, 40 men beneath the statue, and it's imposing. It's like, wow, this is a thing. This is a real society. So, and I actually was thinking maybe that would be something that I'd be interested in proposing eventually to a local parish. Like if I did find a place eventually where I was going to stay and raise a family, I'd say, hey, local priest, how would you feel that we do a 5-year project or 2-year project where we find a way to fund the building of a statue and found a brotherhood so that we can carry it?
I'd like that. I think that's a brilliant idea.
But you're right. So I think so. It's interesting. We've come to the end of this conversation. I mean, it doesn't have to be the end, but we've flowed to a state where we're talking about what people do practically and what you can do. Because I asked, what does it look like to bring this forward without it being fake, without it being cosplay? And a lot of it, I think, is you were right in saying it's got to be little things. So, for example, I'm a big fan of grace, of saying grace before meals. I say it to myself, at the very least. But often, if you propose it to people, they'll join in. They'll be happy for you to say it. And especially, well, at least notably, other young men, which is something that I found very, very cool.
Young men seem to be increasingly the most religious.
Yeah, I think they're the ones from my experience. I mean, this I'm sure varies, but in my experience, talking to young men and young women, young men are the ones that care about this conversation. So young men are the ones going, I want to get married. I don't know how to do that without a faith, so I need to struggle with that now. I want to figure out, as you just described, how do I or as you described earlier, how do I deal with the potential failure of my life? How do I deal with that? How do I deal with suffering? In my experience, trying to have these conversations, the young women around me care less. They're just uninterested in the conversation. It's just, and that's fine. They have other things that they worry about. But this is a conversation that they don't find interesting. They won't engage with it in the same way that when I mention this to young men around me, they will their eyes will latch on and they'll be present. They'll be like, wow, okay, I'm not the only one worrying about this.
Yeah, that is actually exactly my experience. I mean, Jesse is obviously an exception because there are many exceptions, but on the whole, it is definitely men 30 and below maybe 20 to 30 who are really, really thinking about this. And not only like the difference I notice is not how it's you having a faith individually, it's you having a faith in communion with other people. You know,
Yes, I think
that's
yes,
yeah, they aren't looking for an individual faith. Many people, they're looking for a faith where they are specifically in communion with others.
yeah, I think that's absolutely right. A lot of what I think, something I keep coming back to whenever we're discussing issues like real issues like this, the issues that we're facing, that we have to try and grapple with it again. And I say again because the thing that I come to is that we're sort of having to return to basics on everything. How do we organize ourselves? How do we have a common reference point? How do we read? How do we talk to each other? How do we, build community? And
None of us know.
no, exactly. So we're having to have these conversations. And so it is, in a sense, I mean, I'll be positive. It's hopeful that people are taking these questions seriously.
Yes.
Because it's very important. How do we do this? Because it's not, and as you'll say, it's not just me having to justify it to myself. It's how do I relate to the people around me? How do I build a community? How do I exist in a society? And that is, and the answer that we end up coming to is something like, yeah, you need a religion.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and that's an uncomfortable thing to grapple with, but that's what it entails to be a believer, is to grapple.
Jacob, the story of Jacob grappling with the angel takes on a whole new meaning.
Oh, wow. I had not thought of it that way, but yes.
So, I mean, that's not an original thought. That's definitely the result of having spoken to many other people, that whether or not Jacob actually physically grappled with an angel, I don't think is necessarily relevant. What's more relevant is what that represents, which is the fight between you and your physical self and your mental and emotional self, the fight between that and what God or reality or even the rules, the religious rules you follow or believe in want, and it's that grappling between the two.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, there's very poignant always to point out the precursors to our Christian faith are the people of Israel. And
Yes.
you know what Israel means?
No.
We who wrestle with God.
Oh, well, there you go. That's interesting.
Yes, it does put things in perspective when you look at it that way, and you look at the stories of the Old Testament.
Yeah, it does.
And it's a direct precursor to the idea that, well, we are fallen creatures and we are imperfect and have to be redeemed. But yes, I would like to keep talking as we move in the next few months about doing that hike.
Yeah, no,
So let me know. We can organize it for when you're coming over anyway, and then we can maybe set a date around that time fairly annually or something.
So the only date I have in mind when I'm going to possibly come to Spain anyway is the 1st to the 3rd of August, because I'm probably going to see Pablo in Madrid at that point. But I don't know if August would be a good time to do it because it's hot, it might be a good time to do it because it's hot. But then I'll come up with a date. I'll come and try.
Okay.
I'll figure
August
out.
is fine. We can do August. The hike I had in mind anyway would involve being early morning.
Oh, right. What, like at 4 in the morning or 5 in the morning?
Oh, I mean, I hadn't thought that early, but we could do something like that. But it involved leaving the city at around 8 a.m. or 7 a.m.
Okay,
and getting starting the hike at 9 and getting to the top by noon and lunchtime.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. because you beat the sun, and then also it's just like getting up early is also part of it.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that sounds really good.
Okay.
But yeah, that was very interesting. It was nice to chat.
It was.
Yeah.
Thanks for chatting, Isaac. It's
No,
always good to
absolutely.
talk to you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed
and I'll
it.
see you soon.